Awesome. Well, guys, thanks for coming. This is my first time presenting at MCN. Be forgiving. A little bit about me. My name is Elizabeth Blackwood, and I'm the Digital Assets Librarian at Hillwood Estate Museum and Garden in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to be telling you a little bit about our transition from one dam into another, but most specifically about our big organizational structure change that kind of rocked our institution just a little bit, and is still doing so. A little bit about me: I've been in my position for just under 2 years, and I come from a library background, so if you hear a lot of that jargon, I apologize in advance. I can't help it. Library school. To situate things just a little bit, I want to tell you a little bit about Hillwood. We are a historic house and gardens located in Washington, D.C. It's the former home of Marjorie Meriwether Post, who is the heiress to the Post cereal dynasty. So Jell-O, that kind of stuff. We house a large French and Russian decorative arts collection, focusing heavily on 18th and 19th century decorative arts. And most famously, we have a collection that has a large Romanov family of provenance, and we have 2 Fabergé eggs. So that's the fancy stuff. Why I'm on a lot of watch lists communicating with Russia. We see a visitation of about 80,000 visitors a year, with about 80 employees, including our horticulture and security staff. And more technically, we host our dam on site. We have about 101,000 assets as of Friday, and about 40 active dam users. To fixate this a little bit, tell you a little bit about kind of the 3 areas where we focus our dam. The first being our object collection, which pulls data directly from our CMS, which I'll talk a little bit more later. So all of the research and provenance related to that, all housed through our dam. Our library and archives, this is Scampy, our founder's former pup, who is probably going to appear several times throughout this. I promised in my tweet that there would be dogs and Scampys. Our library and archives was probably one of the larger aspects of our dam. We hold a lot of archival photos that have been digitized, archival video that we've outsourced to have digitized, as well as a large archival project that we're working on with the University of Michigan's Bentley Historical Library to digitize more of our founders' papers, which are mostly PDFs, but we've been adding a lot of assets to our system. And then finally, our institutional images, professional photography, kind of marketing and design related aspects. So those are kind of the 3 major areas. Of course, there are other things, but the major areas that we focus on within our dam and our users. And to give you a little bit of background on kind of the history of dam at our institution, when I came into the position, I was really lucky to enter a community that was already very familiar with digital assets management, why it was important. There's been some type of dedicated software, not necessarily a formal dam, but some type of dam type-esque thing since the late 2000s, with a formal system implementing about 2010, 2011. So a lot of time had already been placed on this infrastructure, which helped us develop a lot of the systems that we have around it. So it really is the engine that drives both business and creative processes at our institution. As far as our integrations go, we integrate with our collection management system, which is Rediscovery, if anyone is interested, which pushes all of our collection data into our dam. And this is really important for us because our licensing requirements on our CMS are really, really limited. So only a small amount of our collection staff and a small amount of our curatorial staff have access to that. It's also, sorry for Rediscovery fans, it's kind of clunky, so it's not the easiest to get around, which our dam has kind of been the window for that. It's also true for access to our collection with the public. We're a historic house, and we don't interpret with labels inside the house. So if anyone is interested in learning more about objects in our collection, that is accessed through our online collection on our website, which also pulls from our dam. So, and these integrations feed a lot of the creative activity and functions at Hillwood, just because the majority of the stories that we use in our marketing, that we use with our publications, are based on items that our founder collected. So being able to access that data is really important. Also central to our dam is our rights strategy. It really does, our dam houses our rights information not necessarily in a way other than it being stored in metadata, but our users have been pretty good about accessing that. These are three kind of pain points that we've had in the last couple of years relating to our rights. The first image, our founder was a socialite in the better part of the 20th century and was photographed by a lot of pretty famous photographers. This one is Joseph Karsh, who's a Canadian photographer who all of his rights are still held by his estate, which we had this digitized from our archives and no one had really researched who did this, can we use it? We kind of used it a few times anyway, but that information has now been updated. So our digitized archival collections are one of the biggest areas that we have rights concerns. The second would be our publication photography. We have some kind of ambiguous photography contracts. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those, which haven't been completely clear about our copyright holders or usage. So like this image, which is on my square moose, we use our DAM to be very explicit about what images can be used for what, whether people listen to that or not. And then finally, our founder's history is really heavily rooted in a corporate history. So our hippo here represents the 1960s ad for Jell-O. Jell-O is owned by Kraft Heinz at this point, as is their trademark, so anything we use with that is pretty tricky. They've been really great to work with, but they do want all of that documentation, just like we want that documentation when we license images in and out. So those are kind of the main areas that Hillwood is using DAM and has been using it for quite a while. And since we've been using it for a while, we have developed some bad but understandable habits. In the early days of DAM at Hillwood, there was an admin, but not necessarily a dedicated DAM manager, like a person actually in my role. So it was a person who had a full-time other job, who's sitting in the front row right here, trying to manage our digital assets. So there wasn't really a strong enforcement of best practices. Also, for a museum of our size, we didn't have a lot of the resources to find where those best practices were at the time. We also had a limited understanding of metadata and indexing, and specifically how our system indexed our metadata. So kind of created some rough, bad practices there. Ingesting entire personal drives of images. When we first migrated out of a drive into each of our various stages of DAM, it kind of was just find everything that's an image, put it in the DAM, match the same folder structure. So at this point, there was already a precedent for ingesting full folder structures into the system. So things on the left would be something that's in our DAM, on the right is something that's in someone's personal file structure. Most of our image managers had control of their own collections, so they could add folders, add images, add or not add metadata, and I just gotta keep touching it. So the example that was already in the database looks something like this. They did the best with what they had and what they could work with from what was already implemented, but because our system did not index folder names, all of those images had no metadata, nothing filed down to them, so if you didn't know where they were, you weren't going to find them in a search. And this strategy of personal folder structures functioned just fine for the first phase of our DAM, where the main users and our image managers, it functioned for them because it was their structure. They created it, they knew where to find things, but it was not scalable. So as we had turnover, as our collection grew, as our assets in the database grew, we kind of got a little unwieldy with our folders. So if you look, the first column is something from our collections division. So exhibitions done in a hierarchical year structure. You might not know what happened in 2003, what exhibitions were done. I didn't. I was starting middle school then, so I was not great. Sorry to reveal my age. But you can see it opens up. You could find what exhibitions happened. But then if you go on, we have our marketing folder, which also has a folder called exhibitions. Also in that, different titles of exhibitions, not done by a chronological order. So I don't know where any of those go, and I can attest that they are not in chronological order. Also in our marketing folder were all this other stuff: events, floral arrangements, indoor photography, outdoor photography, date unknown, that year structure that is replicated in other things. Who knows what's in there? Also, if you were a new person coming into a role at Hillwood and you were looking for something, would you know who Bill Johnson is? Just a folder for him? We know, but what about Eric Kowalczyk? Also, 2017, there's 2004 below that, so I don't know what kind of structure is working on there. Left us with a lot of questions, and we realized that this really was not a stable or scalable organizational structure that was going to support our growth as an institution. So, when I came into the position, I was getting a lot of questions and hearing a lot of problems with search and discovery, and because I had so many folks working ahead of me, predecessors, dam managers before me, who set up a really good kind of structure at Hillwood, I was able to take the time to really think about what was causing these issues rather than have to spend all the time like trying to get people to adopt the system. So I did a count, and this is the root of the majority of our problems. So we had more than 1,000 folders with only about 80,000 assets in the system at the time, 1,000 folders across 8 collections, and only about 40 users. So it's a little scary. And as someone who was new and really didn't know what I was doing, I was also having this problem. So we had a series of compounding problems that drew off of this. Also, fun stuff from our collection that some people at our institution didn't even know we had this image. So. We had our 1,000 plus folders, which was really caused by all of our image managers being able to create new folders. No mandatory metadata fields on ingest. You could just put your whole drive in and go in, replicate those folders exactly. Folder names not being indexed in the search. And then this led to a lot of questions. These are some of my favorites, / the ones I heard the most. I can't find anything. Okay, what are you looking for? Why do we always use that same image? So there were those 3 people who, do add metadata to their stuff, and when they're looking for an image of the front of our mansion, there are 3 images that come up. So those are 3 we're going to use. Obviously, that must be all we have. So those are the 3 that are always used. My favorite workflow question. I always find this one photo of page 14 of this search, and now it's not there anymore. So that was our curator who would search one very broad term that showed up in a keyword, go to page 14, because that's where he knew 14 of like 1,200 results, find the image there, and then while I was adding metadata, trying to make this more friendly, I messed up his workflow completely. So, additionally, all of this caused us a lot of department silos, which if you're a librarian or have any kind of background in that, silo is like a no word. Curators searching only via the accession number, our marketing and interpretation only utilizing folders that they had organized themselves, which really only contain the assets that they had paid for, and our library and archive spending a lot of serious time to really useful but very unfamiliar metadata. So we're not all super familiar with Library of Congress subject headings. So on top of that, we realized we were having some serious search and discovery issues, and we had very little access, use, and reuse. And we spent a lot of time and money on the creation of these assets, and we were wasting a lot of money and time by not using them to the fullest across our global dam. Additionally, we were wasting a lot of staff time because staff were having to constantly search through many unknown, mysterious folders of assets, and we wanted, instead of doing this, we really wanted to find a way to make a simple browse that was going to result actual satisfaction from folks who were not looking in the exact folder. So, more gifs. This is our founder waving goodbye to our old system. I'm not going to talk heavily about our migration process because I feel like when you're in the DAM community, you hear over and over again about people's presentations on how they did it good with their DAM migration. So I'm just going to tell you the 4 main things relating to this that were in our RFP. We wanted a faceted browsing function, mandatory metadata fields, controlled vocabulary functions, which would feed those facets, and administrative folder control. Folders. So in this process, which I'm going to make it look like it was really easy and then tell you about how terrible it was, we went from our 1,000 plus folders to just 80 folders. And the majority of those 80 folders are in our archives, which is the only collection that kept its same structure just because it is very difficult to create a hierarchical structure for an archive. But it was not all smooth sailing. And this is our founder's yacht, her 47-foot yacht that she loaned to the military during World War II for them to use, and she referred to it as her small family ship. So, not that easy. Metadata issues. These were the issues that we saw coming forward. We knew this was going to be a horrible issue. It was the only thing that we really could kind of plan for when we were doing our migration. And that's Facets rely on metadata, and ours was all at the folder level. So some ways that we tried to combat this is also kind of get everybody involved as we started out having our Metadata Mondays, which were a teaching opportunity and also an adoption opportunity for our entire staff. Anyone who wanted to could participate. And we held 2-hour blocks over our lunch hours once a month, where our staff could come and be logged in as image managers for their particular department's collection, and add metadata for things that they knew about and utilize their knowledge, because I definitely didn't have it. And also do that in the presence of the admins on the database as well as our IT staff, so if there were questions that came up, we were right there together doing it. It also served as a window to have staff members from many different departments discussing the importance of our metadata, importance of our controlled vocabularies, and talking about ways that we could solve problems in our database. And here are a lot of the problems that they may not have voiced. We also had pizza, so that folks there would recommend. Or the 2-pound container of guac that we had at one point, that was also a hit. And of course, the less fun task was a lot of manual metadata, which I did primarily over a 2-week period while we were migrating, and I just kind of was like, I'm not out of the office, but don't bother me for the next little bit, where I don't know everything about our collections, but was able to kind of apply down a lot of that folder level metadata to at least get a collection, some type of year, some type of tag that we could use in order to ingest this and have some type of like actual search to train on. Would recommend finding a podcast with a deep archive for that. Our next big roadblock was our date situation. Software's never really built for our sector, as much as we'd like to think so. We run into these issues all the time. Our new system required a hard month, date, year in order to use this date browsing system, which those of us in museums who work with art objects, who work with archives, even for us with our photography shoots, there really isn't a hard date that you can use. We didn't really worry about this in our last system because there was no way to browse, so we just used a text field in order to hold our date functions. But we combated this by creating a tag list of years in order to relatively give folks a way to browse a date range with, using circa dates as 5 years on either end. But the real reason I wanted to highlight this is it doesn't take away from having like a hard date field. This wasn't a solution for that. So sometimes when you're switching from a faceted or from a folder-based system to a faceted system, it's going to require duplicate metadata. It's going to require doing a little bit more than you would have before just to kind of improve the user experience for your users. Onward is our controlled vocabularies. Our last system had a free keyword. Anyone can add keywords on ingest if you so desire, which I was happy about because that meant they did some metadata, a start. But just to demonstrate our issues that we had specifically with our controlled vocabularies and kind of user applied keywords, all the different ways you can name our founder. Marjorie Merriweather Post, her birth name. Any of the names that she took after her 4 marriages. The internal code that our marketing department was using, her Library of Congress subject heading, or any way you could possibly imagine to misspell all of those. And then take that down to her 3 children who all had the same marriage kind of situation, the same controlled vocabularies, all of those sorts of things. We had some issues. So the moral of the story with this is if we had waited around to have, we're working in the process right now of establishing a metadata governance committee, but if we had waited around to really take the time and get everybody's opinion in our institution, we would not have launched. We would still be in the process of trying to create a keyword list. So kind of just took the first 150 that were showing up, kind of aggregated them, tried to make the best of that, and just made a decision. Facets require controlled vocabularies, obviously. Controlled vocabularies require decision making, and that takes staff time. So, which is something that we don't have a lot of. This image was what I searched in our database for the word busy. Is what we got, women being busy, which I think is common. But that just gives you a little bit of background of how we kind of got this off the ground in a speedy fashion. It may not have been quite best practice, but we did have to make some kind of decision in order to train our users on these facets. Change is really scary. So this was probably our biggest issue that we're dealing with still right now. Folder structures were really comfortable, and a lot of our users who use this database have been at our institution for 20 plus years. They're not necessarily digital natives, and they've worked really hard to learn the systems that they learned. So we came into some disruptive patterns. We disrupted a lot of workflows with this. Change is really scary. I was listening to Gabrielle Liddell's talk yesterday from Folger, and she described it as making a metaphor early on. This is what I think I should have done early, so I learned that yesterday, of talking about finding similarities between what a faceted browse looks like. I used REI here because we're in Denver. You guys going hiking. And finding ways to like make connections with those. So you know how to online shop. It's not any different than that. So trying to teach some of our folks about that. I only had one user who cried when we did this, so I think that was there was one though. And then our issue that some users really, really liked our folders. That was probably one of our biggest issues. With this, we had a curator who specifically liked to use our digital asset system as his version of the collection management, or our CMS, because it pulled all the data, it had everything that he needed, plus more images. It was a little bit easier to search. He liked this folder-based system because the only assets in our database that had metadata were the collection items. So it really kept all that other stuff out. So if he searched for an exact accession number, he was going to get the exact accession number. He was going to get that item. There would be no Fabergé Family Egg Festival photos. There would be nothing else attached to that. And that GIF is when we 3D printed the inside of that, the surprise inside of that Fabergé egg. But just thought I'd throw that in. So we had taught our users to truncate accession numbers, so 51 dot star asterisk, because no one would actually use an advanced search to try and find anything, God forbid, an advanced search. This is how we kind of got around our search function in our last database. So this would have brought up all of the items that were paintings. 51 for us is our paintings. Now in our system, it brings up nothing because it looks up for that. It's actually looking for that asterisk. So we're in the process of relearning that. Now I know I worked so hard to get you to learn how to truncate that, and now you don't have to do it, and it's very confusing. But when you search 51 now, you are getting everything that could possibly have 51, anywhere in the file name, anywhere in the date, absolutely anything. So it does require an extra step of limiting by the object collection if you're looking for something that's an accessioned item. So it was annoying for a lot of folks to try and learn that we had to add extra steps that we weren't used to. And we're still in that process. Our big takeaways from this were that facets take a lot of time. A lot of time on the manager side, a lot of time on the training side, and at some extent, a little bit more on the user side. They take time for training, they take time for adding that extra metadata, and it takes time for adjustment. Our major takeaways, I consider this is our meh Marjorie, one of my least favorite photos. And that's how we were before with our database, but our outcomes, I think, much happier going Scampy again. We don't have a lot of hard data yet. We just launched in August, nothing super meaningful. So we've just now gotten everybody trained as users, or in the process of training our image managers. But so far, we've been really positive. And that's about where we are right now, of upending our series folder structure. Thanks.
The microphone is good.
So I was really interested in your name problem with
Marjorie, Merriweather, everything,
Yeah.
because we have a lot of Salem families that name their kids the same things as them, and then have married names, and then go on forth like that. Did you just like pick one? She's going to be Marjorie Merriweather post the end. Did you try to capture any of those other random names?
So we're trying to capture that in our like actual descriptions, if that's available. So, and we can usually tell that by year, what year was she married. We can apply those names. But for this situation, we were lucky enough that she had a Library of Congress subject heading, and that is what I went with. So, and that's the name that we use kind of as our, when we discuss her in our interpretation, that's the name that we use. So we were lucky in that regard, but it definitely won't solve everything.
Sorry, I came a little bit late, so this is maybe a noodly question. So the indexing engine that's underneath your DAM is then producing those facets that you can then pull into the interface, or?
That's all metadata. So that's like fields that we created.
Oh, sure, but in terms of like the structure of browsing
Yes.
for the end user,
Yes.
that's coming from.
Yes.
Do you know what is that? What's underneath?
Solar.
Thank you.
How did you go about training all of your users on how to use this system? Like, what types of activities, and how long did it take you to kind of onboard them?
Yeah, so we really started it with an hour-long training with department level, so trying to use searches that they would normally replicate, and we really just walked down the interface and like, this is the home button, this is this, this is this. And for a lot of our users, they had used our previous system, so I was able to make a lot of connections, and I actually like kind of used the old documentation to structure those, so that way the documentation from our previous system in order to kind of make connections with that, so things looked similar. Like sometimes they were, like, it was this, now it is this. But mostly it was just me tracking all the questions that I got, so I went forward with training, and then I have a giant spreadsheet of people ask me this, I need to fix this in my documentation, I need to change this in the next training. So the folks who I trained first did not get as great of a training as the folks who I trained last, but it's iterative, so.
How exactly did you get the Metadata Mondays to happen? Was it, I mean, how did you get people to show up? Was it the pizza? Was it the guacamole? And how did you get your leaders allow you to do that?
Yeah, great question. I'll come back to it. We were really, really lucky that our director actively uses this database regularly. She's writing a book right now and was kind of gung-ho about getting this implementation happen. So she kind of like gave us the okay on doing it using, you know, however much money we used on our pizza the first time. The pizza was really key for the first time around. But our development team was really crucial to it, really, because we have a lot of images of members that are not tagged, and our clientele skews a little bit older, so a lot of times we have people who died and they're looking for images of them. We have folks, a membership was a really big draw, like the folks who do membership and the folks who do development, because this like tagging function, our member staff is pretty young, so they were like, oh yeah, I can come in and like tag photos of people. I do that all the time on my Instagram. So it was kind of hyping it up about how easy it was. It was a lot of hype though. I would say. There's pizza. You can like eat lunch with other people today. Like you can go to a different place and eat lunch.
I was just going to ask where you had to compromise, because obviously you have a huge range of users who use these assets in a totally different fashion.
Yeah.
And obviously you can't facet everything, and there's things that are missing in certain groups. I guess the second part of that, is there something like the vendor can do to improve that you would like to see in a feature use with the facets and the folder systems?
Yeah. Our biggest compromise definitely came from folks who are using it to search our object collection, because previously it was so easy that you just had to know the accession number or know the prefix to the accession number to search like everything that we have that's gold, everything that we have that's a painting. And those really are not functioning workflows now. And we've kind of had to either create collections for those or create very specific facets. We're working on doing a facet based off of the material that something's made out of. So we're having to do a lot of kind of replicating things that already exist in a collection management system that we can pull that data over, but we can't necessarily, we have to clean it in order to make it facetable. So it's been a challenge there. As far as what vendors would need, make me a dam and a collection management system. Thanks. I think this might be our last question.
This was just a follow-up to the Metadata Mondays. What kind of training did you give those users at the beginning of those sessions?
Yeah.
As far as what they could put in?
Great question. Typically, we would have a certain group come, like our first hour would be our development staff who are mostly tagging names, and I'd be like, you're gonna do first name, last name. You're gonna separate everything with a comma. This is how it's gonna be, and like put it up on the screen. And we would try and focus people on just doing one type of metadata. So your development, you're gonna be tagging faces, or your horticulture, you're gonna be tagging locations of where things are. And I think it really had to do with having our IT staff help us out and walking around and making sure we were talking to our folks who were there. We don't have a huge staff, so we had, maybe 15 people, the max, whoever came to be. So it wasn't unwieldy. And most of our folks were pretty dedicated to it and were like having their, membership database open to make sure names were being spelled correctly and asking other folks like, is this person's husband? Is this location before we changed whatever location in the garden? So we didn't have a lot of issues with training. People were pretty good listeners, but I could see how that would be. One more? Quick. Okay. So these are all
tag attributes. They're not free text.
Yeah, these were tags.
So how did you know what tags had to be in there before you started Metadata Mondays? Because I'm not going to be able to get my development people to export me all the names in the database, so I have to add them to the list, right?
Our database, our names were not tags. Those were just free text. But our locations, so the tagging of like locations on campus, we did a couple of interviews with our horticulture staff and some of our older horticulture staff who'd been there before, we remodeled, so some of our archival images we were lucky to still have that, that knowledge in our community. That was one controlled vocabulary list that we did pass around to the folks who.
Okay, so it's just free text for names.
For names, yeah, free text. Though we are hoping to be able to export that data at some point and make it something that people can have an autofill function for. So, thanks. If you're okay waiting for lunch.
Well, so I guess one of the questions is, like, when those names are coming from an authority, are you integrating it all through like an API to be able to pick a
No.
Library of Congress, something like that?
Not yet. It's phase 2, we're thinking. So. Thank you, guys.
Oh, okay. Because that was my question. What software? Like, okay. You want to go to lunch? That was great. I really appreciate that.